Arvind Malhotra looked like the perfect man online, but the truth behind his smile was darker than anyone imagined. Reema Vaidya believed she was beginning a new life in the USA, until she discovered the terrifying secrets hidden inside his locked rooms. Detective Laura Greystone sensed something was wrong the moment she saw his silent house and vanished women in the records. Neil Hartmann followed a digital trail that exposed a crime far bigger than a simple love scam. And Maya Trent, the neighbor who noticed everything, unknowingly became the key to uncovering a chilling operation no one was meant to survive. Arvind Malhotra lived a life that seemed perfect from the outside, a life so carefully crafted that it pulled people in like a magnet. His social media displayed luxury dinners, rooftop views, and photos in front of grand monuments across different countries. Every image looked bright, polished, and full of promise. For many people, it was easy to believe that he was exactly who he appeared to be: successful, generous, and searching for companionship. But behind the filters and the carefully selected photos, something dark awaited, hidden from the world. And it was this curated illusion that first drew Reema Vaidya into his orbit. Reema lived in Pune, where she worked in a small design studio. She wasn't wealthy, but she dreamed big. She wanted a stable future, a partner who respected her, and a chance to explore the world beyond her hometown. When she came across Arvind's profile on a marriage website, his confidence stood out instantly. He wrote about expanding his business in Seattle, about wanting a partner who would grow with him, and about searching for a meaningful connection. His profile sounded like the exact kind of life she had imagined for herself, but never thought she could reach. Their conversations began casually, but Arvind quickly took control of the pace. He always responded with perfect timing, always knew the right thing to say, and always hinted at a future filled with comfort and opportunity. Reema felt noticed in a way she hadn't before. She felt valued, chosen, and important. Arvind talked about settling down, planning a life together, and providing her with everything she deserved. It felt unreal how fast everything moved, yet it felt comforting too, as if a long-awaited future was finally taking shape. He told her he wanted her beside him in the USA. He spoke of marriage, a home with large windows overlooking the city, and a life free from financial stress. Reema's parents had concerns about the speed of the relationship, but Arvind addressed every one of them with calm assurance. He promised he would take care of her like family. His confidence silenced every doubt. Within 3 months, her visa was arranged, her tickets were booked, and her suitcases were filled with hope. Reema boarded the flight with a nervous excitement that almost brought tears to her eyes. She believed she was stepping into the happiest chapter of her life. She imagined the airport reunion, the new home, the start of something beautiful. She had no idea that she was walking straight into the center of a plan she could never have imagined. When she arrived in Seattle, the first impression felt off, though she couldn't explain why. Arvind welcomed her with a polite smile that didn't match the warmth of their online conversations. His eyes studied her more than they greeted her. The ride to his house was quiet. The city outside the car window looked cold and unfamiliar, but she convinced herself it was just the stress of travel. When they reached his home, the atmosphere felt strange. The outside looked neat, but inside, the silence was sharp. Reema noticed how spotless everything was, almost unnaturally organized, as if nobody really lived there. Arvind guided her through each room without much expression, pointing out where she would sleep, where she could keep her belongings, and what areas she shouldn't enter. He said it all so casually that she didn't question it at first. But the rules began the moment she set her suitcase down. He took her phone, saying he needed to install an American SIM card, but didn't return it right away. He told her she shouldn't go outside alone yet, claiming it was unsafe until she adjusted. He mentioned that she didn't need her own money for now, because he would handle everything. Each restriction sounded harmless when separated, but together, they built a cage around her. Reema felt a faint uneasiness, but she brushed it aside. She told herself adjustments were normal. She reminded herself that this was a new country, a new life, and maybe she was just overwhelmed. But deep within her, a small, quiet warning had already started whispering, a warning she didn't yet understand. What she didn't know was that her arrival wasn't the beginning of the future she imagined. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous, something that had been planned long before she ever boarded that plane. And the cracks in Arvind's perfect image were about to widen in ways she could never have predicted. The days following Reema's arrival unfolded in a way she hadn't expected. Instead of settling into a loving home filled with warmth, she found herself adapting to an environment that grew stranger with every passing hour. Arvind's house felt less like a place someone lived in, and more like a space someone controlled. Reema noticed how every object seemed carefully placed, how every room looked staged rather than lived in. There were no casual items lying around, no signs of personality, no sense of comfort. It was as though the house had been prepared for a guest he didn't plan to keep for long. The first odd detail Reema noticed was the number of locked rooms. Arvind had given her a brief tour, but several doors remained closed without explanation. When she asked about one of them, he simply said it was used for storage. She didn't press further, but a part of her wondered why every storage room required a heavy metal lock. The more she observed, the more she realized these weren't ordinary locks. They were industrial, the kind used in offices or facilities where security mattered more than convenience. Security cameras were positioned in corners she wouldn't expect. One pointed directly at the staircase. Another overlooked the hallway leading to the basement. Even the living room had a tiny camera tucked in the corner of a bookshelf. Arvind claimed they were for safety, but something about their placement didn't feel right. They weren't positioned to protect the house from outsiders. They were placed to watch the inside. Arvind's behavior also began to shift in ways that made her uneasy. He monitored her routines as though evaluating her. He noted what time she woke up, how long she stayed in the kitchen, and what apps she used when she finally got her phone back. Even then, her phone had new restrictions. Certain apps wouldn't open. Notifications seemed to disappear before she could read them. A strange tracking symbol appeared at the top of the screen. She wanted to ask him about it, but something about his expression whenever she questioned anything made her hold back. The basement soon became the center of her curiosity. Reema heard faint sounds coming from below, keyboard clicks, muffled beeps, and occasionally the dragging of something heavy. Whenever she tried to approach the basement door, Arvind appeared suddenly, as if he had been waiting. He always dismissed her presence with the same controlled calmness, reminding her that the basement wasn't a place she needed to visit. One afternoon, when Arvind left to run errands, Reema wandered through the house, hoping to learn more about her new environment. She passed his office, which was one of the rooms not fully locked but still difficult to access. The door wasn't shut completely, and curiosity slowly pushed her inside. What she found made her breath catch. On his computer screen, she spotted a folder with a name she didn't recognize. Clicking it revealed scanned documents of a woman, passport, visa forms, bank statements, everything mapped out in disturbing detail. The woman's arrival date to the USA matched a timeline almost identical to Reema's. A sudden coldness filled her chest. Reema clicked back and found more folders, each labeled with different names, each containing the identity records of women she had never met. She felt something shift inside her. This was no coincidence. These files weren't casual. They were organized, detailed, and deeply personal. It was clear they belonged to women Arvind had sponsored before her. Yet none of those names had ever come up in conversation. Where were they now? Reema closed the computer quickly, her hands trembling. She stepped back from the chair, trying to calm her breathing, but the silence of the room pressed heavily on her. Every detail now appeared sharper. The too organized rooms, the unnecessary locks, the oddly placed cameras, the controlled access to communication. Nothing about this house was normal. Arvind returned earlier than expected. His footsteps on the stairs sounded heavier than usual. Reema quickly moved away from the office and pretended to straighten the couch cushions. But inside, a realization had begun forming, one she didn't want to accept. She hadn't just entered a strict home. She had entered a life built on secrets. And those secrets were far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. Maya Trent had always trusted her instincts. She lived across the street from Arvind's house, a quiet woman who preferred morning walks to mindless scrolling on her phone. She noticed the rhythms of the neighborhood, the way garage doors opened at the same times each day, how certain families left for work in matching patterns, and when deliveries usually arrived. So when something unusual happened, even the slightest break in routine, Maya picked up on it immediately. It began with small observations. Before Reema arrived, Arvind rarely spent time outside his house. His blinds stayed closed. His car disappeared only for brief trips. But after Reema's arrival, The energy around his property shifted. Maya noticed lights turning on at odd hours, shadows moving behind the curtains, and the sound of heavy objects being dragged across the floor. She didn't know who lived inside other than Arvind, but she sensed that someone new had joined him, and that something wasn't right. One early morning, while walking her dog, she saw Arvind standing beside his car in the driveway. He was loading thick black bags into the trunk, each one heavy enough to force him to lean into the motion. Maya watched silently from across the street. His expression wasn't relaxed or casual. It was tense, almost horrid. He kept glancing at his house, as though worried someone might be watching from the windows. When he noticed Maya's dog tugging on the leash nearby, he stiffened, his posture tightening in a way that confirmed this wasn't a normal task. A few days later, Maya saw a young woman, Reema, standing at the upstairs window. Her face carried a mixture of confusion and sadness, as if she were trying to understand a situation she couldn't escape. Reema remained there only a few seconds before disappearing from sight. Maya waited to see her again, but the curtain stayed still for days. Something about that brief moment stayed in Maya's mind. The woman's eyes had looked unsettled, almost pleading, even though no words were exchanged. The following week, Maya noticed another odd event. Arvind was carrying several electronic devices into his basement through the back door: laptops, routers, external drives, all either brand new or carefully wrapped. It seemed unusual for someone who lived alone to manage so much equipment. But the strangest part was that he kept checking over his shoulder, scanning the surroundings to ensure no one was watching. Maya quickly stepped behind the tree in her yard, staying out of sight. Her concern grew into uneasiness. She had lived in the neighborhood long enough to know when something didn't add up. And Arvind's house had become the center of too many unexplained patterns. The sudden disappearance of the woman from the window was the final push she needed. Maya decided to make an anonymous report to the non-emergency police line, describing the strange behaviors she had observed. She didn't want to cause trouble, but she also didn't want to ignore signs that someone might be in danger. Detective Laura Greystone received the case. At first glance, it appeared simple, just a neighbor expressing concern. But when she ran a background check on Arvind, something peculiar stood out. He had sponsored several women to move to the United States over the past few years. Yet none of those women had shown any activity after arriving. No employment records, no medical visits, no rental agreements, no social media presence. They had simply vanished from every system, as though they had stepped into the country and then erased themselves. This alone wasn't enough to confirm wrongdoing, but it set off internal alarms. When Laura checked immigration records, she noticed that all the women shared a similar pattern: quick relationships, sudden relocations, and disappearing paper trails. Every case stopped shortly after arriving at Arvind's address. The pattern was too perfect, too deliberate. Meanwhile, inside the house, Reema's world was shrinking. The windows she looked through were always watched. The halls she walked were monitored. And the silence Arvind kept around her felt heavier with each passing day. She didn't know that someone outside had noticed her, someone willing to raise questions. Detective Greystone decided to take the report seriously. She drove to the neighborhood, sat in her car across from Arvind's home, and observed. She noticed the dark windows, the cameras positioned to watch the inside rather than the perimeter, and the strange sense of stillness around the property. Nothing about the house felt normal. Maya saw the detective's car and realized the situation had become real. Her instinct had been right. And while she didn't know the story happening behind those walls, she sensed that Reema, wherever she was inside, didn't have much time left before something irreversible happened. This was a moment when suspicion turned into action, and the quiet street became the starting point of a case that would uncover secrets no one imagined possible. Detective Laura Greystone moved quickly once the strange patterns around Arvind became clear. She knew that crimes hidden behind ordinary walls were often the most dangerous, and Arvind's house felt like one of those chilling examples. To dig deeper, she contacted cybersecurity analyst Neil Hartmann, a man known for uncovering secrets that others believed were impossible to trace. Neil had a reputation for reading digital footprints the way others read newspapers, and he immediately sensed that this case was not an ordinary investigation. Neil began by scanning public records and online activity connected to Arvind. At first glance, everything looked clean, too clean. His social media accounts were flawless, His photos were perfectly curated, and his digital traces looked like they had been polished to perfection. But beneath that polished surface, Neil detected something strange. Hidden across different forums, unindexed websites, and encrypted spaces, he found fragments of transactions linked to identity data. Names, birth dates, passport numbers, pieces of information usually protected, yet scattered in patterns that pointed toward a hidden operation. The digital trail led to a marketplace buried deep within the dark web, a place where stolen identities were bought and sold like ordinary goods. Many of the names listed matched the same women Arvind had sponsored to enter the United States. Their information was posted for sale shortly after their arrival dates. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a system, a business, a trap disguised as romance. As Neil shared the findings with Laura, they realized the scale of what they were facing. Arvind was not just isolating women, he was harvesting their lives. He recruited them online with promises of love, brought them to the USA under the mask of marriage, and then erased them quietly. Their identities were broken into pieces and sold to criminal networks. Their futures were stolen without anyone noticing. It was a crime built on silence, secrecy, and precision. Meanwhile, inside Arvind's house, Reema reached the point where fear turned into desperation. For days she had been feeling watched, controlled, and trapped. Every room felt like a cage. Every sound from the basement made her heart race. She knew something terrible lived in the silence below, something Arvind never wanted her to see. And one night, an opportunity finally came. Arvind was distracted, speaking on a phone call that sounded tense. Reema heard him pacing back and forth, his footsteps rising and falling like waves of stress. The basement door, usually locked with strict precision, was left slightly ajar. Reema knew this moment would never come again. Her hands trembled as she pushed the door open and stepped down the stairs. What she discovered in the basement froze her in place. Rows of hard drives lined the walls, each labeled with women's names she didn't recognize. Tables were filled with forged documents, passports, IDs, bank cards, all bearing faces from the folders she had seen on his computer. There were laptops with screens full of code, devices used to clone information, and machines she couldn't name but immediately recognized as illegal. This wasn't just evidence. It was an entire identity farming operation. In a small metal drawer, she found something that made her knees weaken. It was a folder with her own name. Inside were copies of her passport, bank details, personal photos, and forged documents that she had never seen before. Reema realized Arvind had already prepared to erase her, just like the others. Before she had time to hide or escape, Reema heard footsteps above the basement. Arvind had noticed the open door. Panic surged through her, and she scrambled through the dim room, searching for a place to hide. She crouched behind a metal shelf filled with binders, pressing her hands over her mouth as the sound of his footsteps crept closer. Arvind entered the basement slowly, scanning the room with a cold, calculated stare. He knew someone had been inside. The careful order of his hidden world had been disturbed, and the quiet rage in his face made it clear he intended to control the situation, no matter the cost. Reema's heart pounded so loudly she feared he could hear it. She clung to the shelf, praying he would not look her way. But the tension in the room grew sharper with each step he took. This was no longer a controlled environment for Arvind. Someone had finally uncovered his secrets. At the same time, Detective Laura approached the house from the street, with Neil relaying the digital evidence through her earpiece. Maya watched nervously from her window, sensing that the moment she had feared was finally unfolding. Inside the basement, Reema held her breath as Arvind moved closer. This was the turning point, the moment when all the secrets he built over years were seconds away from exploding into the open. The air inside the basement felt heavy, thick with fear and the weight of everything Reema had just discovered. She remained hidden behind the metal shelf, her body trembling so intensely that even the cold concrete beneath her felt warmer than her skin. Arvind's footsteps echoed across the room with slow, deliberate precision. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't panicking. He was hunting. Every second he spent examining the room tightened the trap around her, and she knew that if he found her now, there would be no escape. Above ground, the quiet suburban street had turned into an invisible battleground. Detective Laura Greystone stepped out of her car with controlled urgency, her eyes scanning Arvind's house for any sign of movement. She already had enough digital evidence from Neil to justify entering the property, but she needed to proceed carefully. She sensed the danger inside, and she could not afford to be even a moment late, not when someone's life might depend on seconds. Back inside, Arvind's voice never rose, but the shift in his breathing was enough to reveal his anger. He noticed the open drawer, the disturbed folders, the moved chair. His perfect order had been violated, his secrets exposed, his control challenged. That was something he could never allow. He moved toward the shelf nearest Reema's hiding place, inspecting the surfaces with a frightening calmness, as though he were rewinding every step she had taken in his mind. Reema pressed her palms harder against her mouth to muffle her breathing. She knew the police were far away with no idea what she had just discovered. She was completely alone in a room full of stolen lives, and her own name now belonged among them. Her heartbeat thumped so loudly she wondered if Arvind could hear it. She braced herself for the moment his hand would pull the shelf back and expose her shaking frame. But before Arvind reached her hiding spot, a sudden noise broke the tension, a firm knock at the front door. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but in the silence of the house, it sounded like an explosion. Arvind froze. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. He wasn't expecting anyone, and he certainly wasn't ready for an interruption. He stared at the basement stairs for a long moment, torn between checking the door and confirming what he already suspected, that someone had been snooping where they didn't belong. But the knock came again, followed by a voice calling his name, calm but commanding. Detective Laura had arrived. Arvind's face hardened, and he moved toward the stairs with quick, sharp steps. Reema knew this was her chance. She slipped out from behind the shelf and crawled deeper into the maze of equipment, her mind racing. She needed to hide. She needed to stay invisible. She needed the police to find her alive. Upstairs, Arvind opened the door only a few inches. Laura introduced herself with confidence, stating that she was conducting a welfare check based on multiple reports. Arvind attempted to maintain his calm facade, but the strain in his voice betrayed him. He insisted everything was fine. He spoke in short, clipped answers. He kept glancing toward the basement door. And with every evasive response, Laura's instinct sharpened. She asked to step inside. He refused. She asked if he was alone. He hesitated. And that moment of hesitation was enough. Laura signaled the officers waiting nearby, and they moved in swiftly. Arvind tried to block their path, but the sudden force of the officers pushing past him shattered the illusion of control he had built for years. The carefully constructed image of a normal household collapsed instantly as they rushed into the home. The officers spread through the house, while Laura moved straight to the basement, her flashlight slicing through the darkness. The sight before her confirmed everything Neil's digital trail had hinted at: piles of identity documents, hard drives, forged records, and the unmistakable setup of a long-running operation. But she didn't see Reema, and her heart tightened. She called out gently, reassuring that the police were there, that she was safe. For several tense seconds, there was no response. Then a faint rustle came from behind the far shelf. Reema stepped out slowly, trembling, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Tears spilled down her cheeks the moment she saw Laura's badge and realized she was finally out of danger. As officers restrained Arvind upstairs, he twisted and fought against them, his calm mask shattered completely. The secrets he had buried for years were now in plain sight, his crimes exposed, his victims heard at last. The authorities later uncovered evidence connecting him to multiple disappearances, each woman marked as a digital commodity rather than a human being. Reema's testimony became the key that unlocked the entire case, rescuing the silent stories of those who came before her. In the weeks that followed, Reema entered a safe housing program, surrounded by counselors and support workers who helped her rebuild her life piece by piece. Maya received recognition for her vigilance. Neil's cyber trail became a model for similar investigations. And Detective Laura closed the case, knowing she had stopped a predator who hid behind charm and screens. For Reema, the nightmare was over, but the courage she found in her darkest moment became the reason countless others were saved. Her story became the documentary's final message, a warning, a reminder, and a testament to surviving a trap built on lies, control, and stolen identities.